What's going on, guys? It's Justin here with Summit Racing, and we have Robby Layton from Robby Layton Nation, and it's time for me to finally get my hands dirty and put my part into Robby's 57 Chevy project. So what we're going to be doing is putting together the motor and trans to put in the 57. So what we have here is a GM Performance 6.2 because we like all the horsepower, and then a bunch of other parts to dress this thing out. Like a GM Performance accessory kit, we have an intake, coil wires, coils, carburetor, headers, header bolts, intake gaskets, exhaust gaskets, a flex plate, all tons of stuff available right here at Summit Racing. We have a ton of Summit Racing brand parts, and that's going to make this thing awesome.
This is the final piece to the puzzle. If you've watched any of our videos over on Robby Layton Nation, we've gotten this far. We have brand new brakes, a Curry rear end. We put a 300 posi third member in. We put the American Racing wheels wrapped on BFG tires. That thing looks awesome. The stance is perfect. Once we get the 6.2 and the Turbo 400 in that thing, we should have no troubles driving this car 2,000 miles back to Ephraim, Utah. So,
yeah, I mean, I say that's enough talking.
Yeah,
let's get to unboxing and get to it.
We got a lot of work. We're about 2 days away from having to take this and drive it across the country. So we're going to get it all put together.
So let's get to it. So what we're doing now is we're getting our 6.2 ready to go in our 57. And the first thing we need to do for that is to get the pan swapped. So we're going to a Summit Racing pan, and this pan is specifically designed for cars you're swapping LSs into. So the sump is different. They've changed a little bit of the design. Our pan's actually shorter this way, so we're gonna have more room to clear the cross member. So we're gonna get the stock 6.2 pan ripped off and get our new pan installed. My favorite thing to do is just take all the bolts, throw them in a greasy can. And
Absolutely.
And we sift through them.
That's the way to do it.
How shiny. So for our new pan, we are going to have to swap the pickup. And actually, we're going to be adding one of our pickup protectors for this. So, you know, one of the issues these LSs have is the oil pickup bolt coming loose and the pickup falling out and losing oil pressure. So we actually came up with a solution here at Summit to a full tab to put 2 bolts in it, so you don't have to worry about that.
Really? Well, that's good to know because I had no idea.
Yes, these things are uber reliable. It's one of the best motors ever designed, but everything does have its quirks. So we like to address, identify, and fix this. So it's a good idea before installing any parts like our pickup and our pan that you hit this stuff with some cleaner and wipe it down to make sure there's no debris or anything like that. So I grabbed a can of brake clean, sprayed it in the end of the pickup, and then made sure there wasn't any chips or anything like that, dust, dirt, debris, and then dry it off with the air compressor and wipe it down, then it's ready for install. So as I was kind of talking about earlier, this is what we did on these LSs. They even have a provision for a second hole, and just the factory just has a 1-bolt tab. So we have this 2-tab design, 2 bolts, a little bit of peace of mind. Then take that. Insert that. So I sent Robby up to the Summit Racing retail store to grab us a couple parts, and what he's getting us is an actual GM Performance windage tray, and the difference is not only is the GM Performance one a full length windage tray, but it has a little provision here. This is actually cut out more for our pickup to sit flush. Now if this was an old crusty junkyard LS, I would have no problem cutting up this tray, but this thing being nice and new, I want to save this for a later project. So to save myself some time, I'm just going to go ahead, yank this one off, put a proper one on that's clearance for this, and then we're going to get rocking and rolling. So when he gets back with that, we'll jump right back into it. So Robby just got back from the retail store with all the parts we need, and I went ahead and took the windage tray out of the box and just slapped this thing on there so I could show you guys the difference. Now this was our factory windage tray, and if you look here, there's not a very big cutout here for our pickup tube, but GM Performance goes ahead and takes care of that for us and does this little provision here. So we don't have to cut, modify, and I can keep this thing on the shelf for when I build another one of these. So let's get our tube on, our oil pan on, and get cracking. So put those in. Go ahead and just verify and look one more time to make sure none of the rods touch so I don't have to massage this thing, and we look like we're good to go. It's not hitting, or else it'd ring. It'd be dead. Socket, don't worry.
God.
So I've gone ahead and already wiped this pan out and cleaned it, but it's a good idea before installing any of this to make sure your oil baffle bolts are tight and to make sure there's nothing down in here. I've done that already. We're gonna go ahead and throw the pan on.
So this is the oil filter housing. This adapter needs to be put in, so I put Teflon tape and then I tightened it up.
Well, our Summit swap pan is installed, so we can roll this thing back over and start hanging some more parts on it. So with that done, Robbie, do you want to start hanging the accessory drive?
Yeah, let's get the front put on it.
Sweet, let's get to it.
All right, so Justin just went up to the retail store to get us a water pump for the 6.2 LS, and I've got a GM factory accessory kit that we're gonna install on the front. So I'm gonna start getting that all bolted up. It's gonna hold the alternator, the power steering pump, and the power steering reservoir. So when he gets the water pump back, we'll have this entire front dressed with a belt on it and ready to move on to another section. So I'm gonna get putting that on. As soon as he gets back, we'll put the water pump on, and then we're gonna move on to the coil packs, the exhaust, and everything else that we need to assemble this 6.2 crate engine. I kind of mock set stuff up before I put it on. So I put the power steering pump in place. I'm just gonna pull the bolts out and keep them where they need to be. I will install this bracket with the provided bolts. So GM does a really nice job of sending all the bolts that you need to put on these accessories. So I just laid them out. I've got this bracket right here that holds the power steering reservoir. It goes on. Now this is an aluminum block, so you want to make sure that once you get the bolts in, you just torque them all and get everything to the correct specification. So I'm going to use my gun to get them in snug, and then I'll come back with a torque wrench, make sure they're all correct. All right, those are all torqued. So this bracket is installed. Now we can move on to getting the alternator mounted, our power steering pump, and our power steering reservoir. This alternator goes in with 2 bolts. Just roll it into position. And this is a 3-wire GM alternator. Same thing, you just want to make sure your bolts are torqued. And we're moving on. So there's a little hose from your reservoir to your pump. You want to make sure that that is clocked in the correct position, and then you want to tighten up your clamps. So I'm going to tighten up the pump before I tighten up the clamps. Again, making sure you torque all your bolts to the correct specification. All right, that is installed. Now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to tighten up my clamps on my hoses. Bottom one's on. Now our top one. So that hose is tightened up. You want to make sure you don't forget something like that, because once this is fully assembled, that would be not a fun thing to get your pliers into to try to tighten up after the fact. Now we have an idler pulley. It's our last piece that needs to go on this bracket, and it's finished up until we get a water pump. So Justin should be back shortly. We'll get that taken care of. We'll get this idler pulley installed, get it torqued, and then once the water pump gets here, our tensioner pulley goes on the other side of the water pump and we're able to put the belt on. It's a good thing to have a reference to know what your torque specifications are. In this instance, we have a book that tells us all of the recommended torque specifications for the 6.2 LS. So this is 37 foot-pounds. I'm just going to adjust my wrench to 37 pounds. And we'll go ahead and torque this bolt down. The rest of our bolts right here, they're all torqued to 18 foot-pounds. All right, so Justin went ahead and got us the brand new water pump. I've got that installed, so everything on the front of this engine is already done. We're moving on to this Summit Racing LS to old style motor mount conversion kit. This conversion kit allows you to go from LS to your factory GM motor mounts. So in our case, we're using another conversion kit to bolt this into the 57 Chevy. But this is a super simple application, has a plate right here. We're gonna bolt this on using red Loctite, and then I'm gonna show you guys how to put the rest of the conversion kit onto this block.
So while Robby's working on the engine mounts, I'm gonna go ahead and throw our steam port kit on. So I already got this thing assembled and built. I'll go ahead and slide them in the holes here and just get our bolts started. And then I'll torque them.
Now that I've got the mounting kit attached to the block, I'm gonna take my GM factory style mounts and I'm gonna bolt them onto this plate right here. So I'll get it on. I've got some lock nuts that are gonna keep it tight, and then we're gonna move on to the coil packs. All right, so these motor mounts are installed. Super good kit, Summit sells them, and it's everything you need to put a new style engine in an old style GM car. All right, now that we've got the motor mounts installed, our steam port bypass, and our water pump, we're gonna be putting our coil packs on. So we're using these billet aluminum ones to kind of dress the top of the engine up a little bit. They install just like factory. They hold our coil packs right where we need them.
Man, those look really fancy.
They're pretty, huh?
I like these a lot. And you know, we have Summit coils, Summit coil harnesses, and then these sweet ICT billet coil brackets. And like Robby said, they're just like stock brackets, but they're nice and billet, and they dress it up. And you know, our car's not pretty on the outside, but she's gonna be pretty on the inside.
You know, it matters how it looks on the inside.
I don't care what it looks like, I'm all about how fast it goes, and I think that's very well embellished in this project.
Well, this 500 horsepower 6.2 LS is gonna get us across the country in lightning speeds.
Yes, and you know,
I mean,
that's 500 horsepower in base form. Imagine if we throw a set of trick flow cylinder heads on it, or like one of our big Summit Pro LS cams. Maybe even a little forced induction, like.
Now you're asking me to stay a couple extra days, aren't you?
I mean, I wouldn't mind it.
All right, so now that we've got the coil packs on, we're gonna move on to the spark plugs. So we have some AC Delco plugs that we're gonna put in. There's no need to gap them because they're preset.
Yep, they're iridium plugs, so you can't, it's not like our old plugs where we
gotta
take
check them.
Yep. The tips are small and delicate on those, so you don't want to go in there with a feeler gauge, knocking them around. Or don't you remember when we used to gap plugs and you would just toss it on the ground and then pick it up and check it? But with those, I do like to look at them all to make sure the strap's not too crazy or any of that. But generally with those plugs, it's set it and forget it.
Perfect. And where these are aluminum heads, we are going to put anti-seize on those because we don't want to have any issues with the threads down the road when we have to change them.
So I went ahead and got never seize on all our plugs, got them spun into the holes, and now I'm just snugging them up before Robby installs the headers.
So once he gets the spark plugs all tightened up, I'm going to grab the Summit Racing Shorty style headers. Those are the headers that are recommended for these type of LS swaps. especially for the 57 Chevy Bel Air. So I'm going to grab those. I've got some new Velcro gaskets and some Stage 8 locking style header bolts. In this situation, these are a great item to have because you can visually look and see if your bolts are backing off, and that creates exhaust leaks. So we're going to be putting these on. That way we can ensure that we don't have any bolts loosening up, and if they do, we can tighten them back up down the road. On these gaskets, you want to make sure that your riding is towards the wall. That ensures that you're putting it in the proper position so that it seals correctly. I'm going to get all of my bolts started before I tighten down anything. That way I can make sure that I've caught threads, and you want to especially make sure of that when you're going into an aluminum style head, which this is. So I'll just snug these all up before I go ahead and torque them all down. When you torque things, you want to make sure that you torque them in the correct order. So on our first pass, we're going to torque these to 11. Our second pass will be to 18. Now we're going to switch up to 18. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the passenger side, then we're going to move on to our coil wires. So our coil packs are installed, our spark plugs are installed. Now we're just going to run the wires that go to the two.
So we've almost got all our header bolts installed, and I just want to show you guys how these cool Stage 8 locking bolts work. So we have this bolt here, it's been torqued to spec, then we're going to take our flag here for our bolt, and as you can see, this has like a 12-point design, so there's a lot of adjustment. And then I just want to take this, put it up against my header pipe, and then push it on. And sometimes you might have to tap these on with a hammer. It kind of just depends, you know, you don't want them to be easy to get off. Now, once this flag's on, you can see it's locked into the groove there, and then this tab is touching the header tube. So this is gonna lock this in place and not allow it to come off. Now, to actually lock the tab into position, we're gonna take these E-clips that they provided, and we're gonna put them on. So just take the back of my screwdriver, I'm gonna knock my E-clip on. And you can use like a small hammer to do this. This is just, I'll be honest, this is what I had in my hand at the time. So, got my E-clip popped on. And just like that, this is all locked and ready to go. Now, they make these kind of hardware for all sorts of things. Any application you can think of, from differential bolts to the end of Dana 60 knuckles to, you know, headers, intake, anything you could think you can put a Stage 8 locking bolt in, they have a bolt for it. So if you're curious about these and want to see our full offering, head over to summitracing.com and check out the full line of Stage 8 bolts. So all our header locks are installed. Now it's time to start throwing on our spark plug wires. So these are our silicone Summit branded wires. I really like these things. They hold up really well, and just install them on our Summit coils. This is the one thing I do love about Coil near plug setups, guys, is, you know, there's no running 80. I'm a distributor guy through and through, but this is pretty decent. And, dude, the energy you get out of one of these compared to like your grandpa's small block coil is, one of these will knock you down, and it's got one for every plug.
Oh yeah, so you get 8 times grandpa's butt kicking.
Yes. Man, we're really killing it here, Robby. This thing is it's almost done. So we sent Robby to the retail store on another parts run. So me and Hillbilly are gonna get this motor off the stand, get the flex plate on it, and then we're gonna mate it to our transmission. So if you could go up, please. I'm gonna grab a couple of wrenches, get these loosened up. So now we're ready to install our flex plate. This thing just goes right on the end of the crank. Sometimes you gotta tap them on with a hammer, depending. And then Hillbilly's gonna throw some Loctite on some bolts and hand them to me. So it is very important that you use Loctite on these and torque them to the proper torque setting. Because if your flex plate comes loose, you're gonna have a bad time. So I went ahead and got our flex plate installed, and then the bolts installed as well and torqued. Now with these ARP studs, you torque these in a series of 3. And yeah, and just for safe measure, I went ahead and I put a paint marker on it. It's just a quick visual inspection so you can see if they've ever moved. Now, because we're going turbo 400 to LS, we need to use a crank snout adapter. So you just take this and this, you don't beat on the end of the crank.
Magic, it goes in.
Yeah, it's like magic and it goes in perfect. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead, get the converter seated in the transmission, and yeah, get this thing hooked up and hopefully set in the car. Not hopefully, we are getting this set in the car tonight. So let's get to it.
So now that we have the 6.2 LS completely dressed up with a flywheel, it's ready for a transmission. So what we chose is a TCI Automotive Turbo 400 brand new transmission with a Summit Racing 10-inch 2800 stall converter. We're also going to be using a Summit Racing dust shield that bolts to the bottom of the transmission. So we've got a few things that we need to do to this transmission before we install it. So right here is where your speedometer housing goes in. So we're going to be putting that in, getting that ready. We've got a transmission mount that we'll install at some point and a shift lever as well. After that, we'll be able to put some fluid in the torque converter. Now the reason for that is you never want to install your torque converter dry. So we put about a quart of fluid in here, we'll install it into the transmission, and then we can actually bolt it to the back of the block. Once we do that, this thing is ready to be put into that 57 Chevy outside.
I'm so excited. Now, let's get this converter full and get this thing seated.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
there is a wrong way and a right way to install a converter, guys, and Robbie's going to show you.
Yes, now it's 3 stages. So you have 1 click, 2 clicks, and you've got to find that 3rd click. If you don't seat it correctly, you will take this front pump out of your transmission every time. So do not force it, but you're going to have, I'll show you, you're going to want to spin it, massage it, and get it to click all the way in so that when you bolt it up to this, you know your torque converter is seated into your pump housing absolutely correct. All right, so we went and got a case of transmission fluid. Like I was saying, we're going to put a quart in this torque converter. Now, you got to pour slow because it's got to go in between all the clutches. If you pour it too fast, it's going to spew all over everywhere. So this takes a little bit of time to get down in there, but once it goes in, we'll put this into the transmission. I'll show you how to engage all 3 clicks. All right, so I'm going to show you guys exactly what I was talking about the 3 clicks. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks. Installed.
The converter's in the trans, it's ready to go. Flex plate's on here. We have the snout adapter, so it's time to make these things together. So let's lower our engine down, get them together, and get these in the 57 Chevy.
I say we do it. This has literally taken all day. This is the moment we've been waiting for. We're meeting our goals. Yes. It's exciting.
We're getting close, Robbie. We're getting close.
Whoa! Time to get pumped. So we're going to lower this down to where we can grab the transmission and put it on the alignment pins and start some bolts. Right there. Do that. So one way that we know for sure that the torque converter is all the way into the housing is that there was no pressure when we bolted it together. So if it's not clicked all the way in, you'll have interference and you won't be able to actually pull this together quite like you need it to. So one thing that you'll notice is that there is not a bolt in this hole. That's because this is an old style transmission bolted up to a new style motor. So in order to get a bolt hole here, you could buy a different case, like a Reed Racing transmission case with a Reed Racing bell specifically designed for an LS application. It'll give you that hole, but there's no hole here because the back side doesn't have any threads. So it will hold. There's 5 bolts in it, and we've done this quite a bit, and we know it works.
This is not our first rodeo. It's at least our 3rd.
Yeah, and we're carbureting this engine, so we're taking it a little bit old school.
Yes, because carburetors are fun. So the torque spec for these bell housing bolts is 37 foot-pounds. So I just clicked up 37 foot-pounds on our gear wrench, click style wrench. Here you go, Robbie.
Thank you. We're going to take this to 37 pounds in one sequence. Done. So now all we need to do is bolt up the torque converter to the flex plate, and this will be ready to install in our car.
So let's get to it.
12, down a little bit more. Okay, we're on the steering arm, we're about to clear it. All right, now come down.
Yes.
Like for real.
Dude. So the motor's in the car, a ton of stuff's on this thing, and it's time to put the carburetor on top. And you know, for a cool project like this, I couldn't think of a better carburetor to use than the new Edelbrock VRS 4150. They just brought this thing to the market very recently, and they built all the bells and whistles to it. Now, for our 6.2 LS, I went ahead and selected a 750. You know, I think it's gonna complement this motor perfectly. So enough talking, let's get the tape peeled and get this thing installed. So this thing's tight and ready to go. The next thing on the list is to make the feed line. So I'm gonna grab some Summit 6AN PTFE lined hose and some Summit 6AN hose ends and get that made. And just like that, our fuel system is plumbed and complete. Now I'm gonna get our MSD box installed. Robbie's working on getting our radiator ready, and we're really close to making some noise.
Ready?
Yeah. I think we're out of time.
How could we be out of time? It's an LS.
Good job, boys.
Right,
good job.
Right.
Good job.
Okay. Finally!
Yes! It made noise! Like, that is such a step in the right direction. That's one more thing we can check off our list. Now, as you guys saw, this thing kind of struggled to start, and it's kind of a mess up on my part because it was backfiring and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and it was like, oh, it's out of time. Or like your carbureted engine that has spark plug wires and a distributor, it's like your plug wires were on wrong.
It was almost like the distributor was 180 off, but there's no distributor.
So with these LS's, you know, it's the same deal, and each coil needs to fire corresponding. This thing isn't smart enough to, you know, figure that out on its own. So I actually had installed the coil harnesses wrong. I had them flipped. We flipped them right over, and this thing came to life. And you know, as you saw, the excitement on our faces.
We just appreciate that Summit Racing allowed us to come out here and do this in their facility, and we hope to come back. So with your guys' help, we might be able to make that happen. Make sure you drop some comments in the comment section below, and we want to hear from you.
Until next time, make sure to like and subscribe to that Summit Racing YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of the cool content we post, like this, celebrity interviews, tool reviews, and so much more. So I'm Justin with Summit Racing, and thanks again, Robby Layton from Robby Layton Nation, for you know, letting me participate, coming out, hanging out with me for the week. It's been a lot of fun, and you know, I hope we get to do this again.
I hope so too. And thank you, Summit Racing, for allowing us to come in your facility, and thank you for allowing our audience to come over and watch these videos.
Heck yeah. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.